They were loved by so many. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, now with their son Nick in custody and so many questions still unanswered.
Jamie Lee Curtis, what do you think happens when we die?
I think we die.
That's it?
I think that's it.
Okay. Okay.
Look closely at Jamie Lee Curtis in that moment, not the version people think they know. Forget the red carpets, forget the polished interviews, forget the fearless icon who spent decades playing survivors and warriors on screen. What appeared outside that memorial service didn't resemble Hollywood royalty at all. It looked like someone who had been pushed far past her breaking point. We've seen grief in this industry countless times. We recognize the rehearsed pauses, the controlled expressions, the designer sunglasses carefully chosen to hide just enough tears. Pain packaged to look human but never unstable. What unfolded yesterday didn't follow that familiar script, not even close. This wasn't styled sadness or a public-facing moment softened for appearances. It was raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to look away from. Her face told the story before she ever spoke a word. There was fear there, frustration too, and beneath it all something heavier, like years of swallowed words finally demanding air. She looked like someone who had been holding the line for a very long time and finally crossed it. This wasn't only about loss, it felt like truth catching up to silence. And when Jamie Lee Curtis speaks without filters, people listen. But when she steps outside the unwritten rules that quietly protect powerful families in Los Angeles, everything changes. That's when the room goes still. That's when whispers start. And that's when handlers begin to panic, realizing this moment isn't staying contained. That's the moment the world leaned in. Everything shifted the instant Jamie Lee Curtis said Rob Reiner's name, not with admiration, not with reverence, but with visible anger that shook her voice and cut through the air. That single moment sent shockwaves through everyone watching, because this wasn't casual commentary. These weren't distant co-workers sharing credits. They were people raised inside the same rarefied world of legacy, pressure and expectation that few outsiders ever truly understand. They grew up in famous shadows: Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh, Carl Reiner. These names weren't just parents, they were standards to live up to. They knew what it meant to exist under constant scrutiny while pretending everything was fine. So when Jamie ignored her publicist, who was clearly trying to pull her away, and began describing what she said really happened inside that Brentwood house, it felt like a boundary had been crossed. There were no euphemisms, no vague thoughts and prayers language, no carefully polished statements cleared by legal teams. She went straight to the heart of the story. The public, she suggested, was being offered a version that framed everything as sudden and unavoidable, a tragic surprise, something no one could have anticipated. Jamie dismantled that narrative in seconds. She spoke about what many had whispered about but never confronted openly. She referenced years of accommodation, warning signs brushed aside, and silence reinforced by money, loyalty, and reputation. Not accusations, but reflections that landed heavily. And that's what made the moment so uncomfortable. Because in hindsight, the silence looked obvious, and admitting that silence means admitting how many people chose not to speak. And this is where the story turns even heavier. The details Jamie hinted at began lining up uncomfortably well with information that had already been quietly circulating among people close to Tom Cruise's wider circle. Different worlds, different relationships, yet the same conclusions kept surfacing, and that collision is what made this moment impossible to dismiss. On one side there was Jamie, visibly shaken, openly mourning someone she had cared about deeply. Her words came from grief, not strategy. On the other side there were growing reports suggesting this wasn't a random ending or an unforeseeable tragedy. Instead, they pointed to a situation that had slowly unraveled after years of unresolved tension and unchecked patterns inside the home. No single voice said it all, but together they began outlining something far more troubling. What lingered most was the moment her voice cracked. She said Rob didn't pass because he was weak. She said it happened because he was a father. That sentence landed like a blow to the chest, because it reframed everything. It suggested that love wasn't just part of the story, it may have been the pressure point. And once that idea entered the room, it refused to leave, forcing people to confront how devotion, responsibility, and silence can sometimes collide in devastating ways. It paints a picture many families recognize, yet rarely speak about openly, especially when addiction, emotional instability, and power collide behind closed doors. Jamie described a dynamic where consequences never fully land because money keeps smoothing the edges, where problems are managed instead of truly solved, and where warnings slowly fade into background noise until there's no time left to rewind anything. This wasn't a breakdown staged for cameras or sympathy. This was someone finally saying what polite society often refuses to confront. And once words like that are spoken out loud, there's no pulling them back. According to Jamie, the final 6 months of Rob's life looked nothing like what the public was shown on the surface. From the outside, everything appeared normal: smiling photos, public appearances, political conversations, ongoing creative projects, business as usual. But behind closed doors, Jamie described a reality that felt far darker and far more fragile. She spoke of a man living on edge, constantly alert, constantly worried, not about headlines or projects, but about safety itself. The late-night phone calls weren't about films or ideas anymore. They were about locks, alarm systems, whether it was safer to sleep with the bedroom door open or shut. Let that sink in for a moment. This was the same man who gave the world stories about love, loyalty, and friendship. A man living in one of the most secure neighborhoods in the country. And yet, according to Jamie, peace had quietly disappeared long before the world ever noticed, hidden beneath smiles, routines, and the weight of silence that protected everyone until it didn't. And yet, according to Jamie, he was afraid inside his own home, afraid of someone bound to him by blood. That's where the story takes a sharp and deeply unsettling turn. This wasn't fear existing in isolation. Jamie hinted carefully, but clearly, that people close to Rob understood how serious the situation had become. And those accounts align with information quietly circulating from circles connected to Tom Cruise as well. Multiple sources suggest that friends stepped in months earlier, not casually, and not with gentle suggestions. This was serious. A sit-down marked by urgency. An intervention-style conversation that reportedly took place less than 3 months before everything ended. The message Rob received was blunt. People who loved and respected him deeply told him the situation had gone too far, that Nick wasn't just struggling anymore, that things had crossed into territory love alone could no longer manage. According to those accounts, Rob was given a clear recommendation: create distance, set firm boundaries, close the door before something irreversible happened. Jamie described this part through tears that erased any trace of polish or performance. Her makeup ran, her voice shook. In that moment, she looked less like a Hollywood icon and more like a friend collapsing under the weight of regret. She said Rob listened quietly, absorbing every word, before giving an answer that still haunts those who heard it. He said, "If I shut the door, he doesn't make it." That single sentence reframed everything. It wasn't denial. It wasn't ignorance. It was a parent standing inside their worst nightmare in real time. Rob believed that distance might end his son's future, so he chose connection instead. He chose to stay present, to keep the door open, even as the cost became heavier. And that choice, rooted in love, fear, and responsibility, is what now sits at the center of this story, forcing everyone to confront how devotion can sometimes become the most impossible burden of all. Even when it terrified him, Jamie made one thing unmistakably clear. Her anger was never directed at Rob for the choice he made. It was aimed at the system around him, the layers of silence and protection that allowed the situation to keep escalating. And she didn't spare herself or those closest to them either. She admitted they all saw signs, moments that didn't add up, bruises that were quietly explained away, attempts to cover marks with makeup that felt wrong but went unchallenged. There were awkward silences, Michelle lowering her eyes when questions about family surfaced, conversations that stopped just short of truth. Time and again, privacy was chosen over intervention, respect over urgency. Jamie didn't excuse any of it. She owned it. She said plainly that they should have done more, that protecting dignity came at a devastating cost. That guilt sat heavy on her shoulders as she spoke. You could see the weight pressing down on her with every word. And now, as more details surface, the final night feels even more unsettling. Jamie hinted at something authorities haven't emphasized publicly, but insiders believe is critical to understanding what happened. There was no forced entry, no broken doors, no shattered windows. That single detail changes everything. It means whoever entered that house didn't have to break in. And once that reality settles in, the story shifts again, away from randomness and towards something far more personal, far more difficult to face. They either had access, or they were welcomed inside. Picture the moment. The house is quiet, the night is still, a familiar sound at the lock or a knock that doesn't raise alarms. Jamie suggested Rob got up, hopeful even then. Maybe he believed this was the turning point. An apology, a reset, a clean slate. She described Rob as endlessly forgiving, almost to a fault, and she said it with love, not denial. She didn't soften the truth. His belief in second chances never seemed to run out. He didn't step into that hallway as a powerful filmmaker or public figure. He walked forward as a father, expecting his child. And that distinction matters. That's where everything, according to Jamie, quietly collapsed. What makes this even more chilling is how it aligns with information tied to circles known for extreme attention to safety. Months earlier, Tom Cruise had reportedly offered Rob professional-level security. Not basic guards, but serious perimeter protection systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of risk. Rob refused. Not out of pride, but out of love. Why did he say no? Because he didn't want his son to feel like a threat. He didn't want his home to feel like a cage or a battlefield. He wanted it to remain a home. That choice, rooted in compassion, changed everything. And once again, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Jamie didn't sugarcoat what that final choice meant. She said Rob refused to live locked behind fear, and instead fear followed him. That single line landed heavy, like the closing of a chapter no one was ready to read. Quiet, devastating, and impossible to forget. Nobody wanted to read those words like that. It felt less like a quote and more like an epitaph unfolding in real time. But Jamie didn't stop there. She revealed something that shifted the story into colder, more unsettling territory, changing how people began to interpret everything that came before. Situations like this are often framed as emotional explosions, moments where feelings boil over and control is lost. Jamie carefully suggested this wasn't only emotional chaos. She implied there was something more deliberate beneath the surface, not planned in a sinister way, but shaped by fear, pressure, and long-term strain. She brought up money, and not casually. For years, she said, funds had been quietly draining from Rob's accounts beyond the documented costs tied to treatment or recovery efforts. Those expenses leave records. They can be traced. What concerned her, she implied, were repeated losses that didn't fit that pattern. Jamie described large sums of cash disappearing with no clear oversight or explanation, money moving into places no one could fully account for. She was careful not to make accusations. Instead, she framed it as a desperate attempt to keep situations contained. According to her, Rob wasn't simply supporting his son financially, he believed he was paying for peace. Month after month, year after year, hoping enough support would keep everyone safe, hoping it would buy time, hoping it would prevent the very outcome no one wanted to imagine. And that realization reframed the entire story, not as a single moment of collapse, but as a long road paved with fear, love, and impossible choices. And when the money slowed, or when Rob finally tried to draw a firm boundary, everything shifted. Jamie strongly suggested that this was the moment the situation moved beyond anything he could control. What makes it especially haunting is that the final confrontation wasn't sudden chaos or a surprise ambush. It unfolded as an argument. Words were exchanged, voices were raised, a painful escalation that had been building for far too long. Jamie referenced neighbors who had grown accustomed to hearing shouting from the house. Arguments that tragically had become routine. But this time was different. The tone wasn't frustration or anger. She said it sounded like fear. Not someone lecturing, not someone laying down rules, but someone pleading. Someone realizing the situation had crossed into dangerous territory. Then came the silence. Jamie said that silence was louder than anything that had come before it. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop. The kind that tells you something irreversible has just happened. Standing in front of the press, she asked a question that froze the room completely. How many people have to bury their friends because love turns into a blindfold? She asked. That question cut deep, because it challenged something people are taught from childhood, that love fixes everything, that patience always wins, that unconditional support is always the answer. In this case, Jamie suggested, love didn't save anyone. It delayed the inevitable. And as her words spread, the reaction across Hollywood became a mix of shock and paralysis. Because once that idea takes hold, it forces an uncomfortable reckoning about boundaries, responsibility, and the cost of staying silent for too long. People didn't know what to say next, afraid to step too far in either direction, unsure how to respond. Jamie's words shattered that hesitation. She forced the issue into the open, refusing to let this be framed as a vague, unavoidable tragedy. By describing years of emotional pressure, fear, and manipulation, she made neutrality impossible. This, she insisted, was not an accident. This wasn't bad luck or fate gone wrong. And Jamie made one thing unmistakably clear: there would be attempts to reshape the story. She predicted the defense narrative before it even arrived: claims about mental health, about addiction, about growing up in the shadow of fame, efforts to reposition Rob as distant or neglectful. Jamie shut that framing down immediately. She laid out her truth plainly. Rob showed up. He intervened repeatedly. He provided support, financially, emotionally, and physically. He stayed present when walking away would have been easier and safer. Her message was firm and unwavering. Rob did everything a parent reasonably could. This, she said, was not a failure of love. It was a choice made by Nick. Then came the moment that shifted the entire atmosphere. Jamie stopped crying. Her expression hardened. When a reporter asked about Nick's mental state, she leaned forward. Her voice dropped, calm, steady, controlled, and she said, "There's a difference between being unwell and being dangerous." That line sent a visible ripple through the crowd. Hollywood rarely uses language like that. It avoids clarity when clarity is uncomfortable. But in that moment, Jamie wasn't protecting reputations or narratives. She was drawing a line, and once drawn, it changed how everyone listening understood what had really been said out loud. There's always nuance, always excuses, always carefully chosen language. Jamie stripped all of that away. She used a word people are afraid to say out loud. She suggested what happened inside that home wasn't confusion or chaos, but something darker, something intentional. That single shift in language changed everything. She admitted she had sensed it years earlier: a lack of empathy, a coldness that surfaced during family gatherings. Moments that didn't sit right but were quietly dismissed to keep the peace. Looking back now, she said she regrets not sounding the alarm sooner. Silence felt polite then, now it feels costly. That realization pulled the focus outward, back to the industry itself. People began asking why someone as private and controlled as Tom Cruise would allow information even indirectly to surface at all. The answer unsettled many. The old guard felt shaken. Because if something like this could happen to Rob Reiner, a man widely seen as one of the kindest figures in Hollywood, then no amount of status, security, or reputation offers real protection. Hollywood is being forced to confront something it avoided for decades. Safety doesn't always break in from the outside. Sometimes the greatest threats already live within the walls. What Jamie delivered that day wasn't just a farewell. It was a warning shot aimed directly at her own world. She wasn't only grieving, she was sounding an alarm, and her message was blunt, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. When silence becomes the standard, damage doesn't disappear. It just waits. Check on your kids, check on your friends. Jamie's message cut straight through the noise. Stop pretending everything is fine while problems rot quietly inside beautiful homes. She made it clear this story wasn't only about Rob. Too often, she said, stories like this orbit one famous name, while everyone else fades into the background. Jamie refused to let that happen here. She made sure people understood the loss of Michelle Singer Reiner just as deeply. Jamie described Michelle as the barrier between chaos and collapse. If Rob was the open door, hopeful, forgiving, always believing, then Michelle was the one standing in the doorway, slowing the damage, absorbing the impact, trying to protect everyone at once. And then came the detail that shifted the tone of the entire moment. Jamie spoke about bruises she had noticed on Michelle's arms months earlier. The explanations were familiar: gardening accidents, clumsiness, the kinds of excuses people reach for when the truth feels too dangerous to say out loud. Jamie admitted something painfully honest. She knew those explanations weren't real. She said she looked at Michelle, and in that look, they both understood the truth and still chose silence. Not because they didn't care, but because saying it out loud would make it undeniable. That confession carried more weight than any accusation ever could. It stripped away the illusion that wealth or status protects people from the same destructive cycles everyone else faces. In that moment, Rob and Michelle were no longer distant public figures. They were human, vulnerable, trapped inside fear, denial, and hesitation despite gated homes, millions of dollars, and public respect. As the investigation continues, Jamie's words linger, reminding everyone that silence doesn't discriminate, and that even the most admired lives can be quietly unraveling behind closed doors. One thing now feels unavoidable: Jamie's words are going to matter. She didn't speak only from emotion, she laid out a timeline. She placed herself inside key moments without ever explicitly declaring it. She positioned herself as someone willing to stand up formally if the time comes. There was no hedging, no softening, no retreat from what she said. Think about what that means. Jamie Lee Curtis potentially sitting in a courtroom, facing the reality of what unfolded, recounting events involving two people she loved deeply. Not for headlines, not for sympathy. She doesn't need attention. Her career is thriving, and she has recently reached a new professional high point. This wasn't strategy or image management. It felt like fury, the kind that comes from being done protecting a system that keeps failing families behind closed doors. Jamie's tone suggested she was no longer willing to stay quiet for the sake of comfort or reputation. And one of the most chilling moments she described made that clear. She spoke about a dinner just 2 weeks before everything ended. Jamie said Rob barely touched his food. He seemed distracted, withdrawn, not himself at all. The conversation felt ordinary at the time, until it didn't. He leaned in and said something quietly, almost casually, that now feels impossible to ignore. He told her he believed someone close to him might hurt them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent. It was said softly, the kind of comment that can be mistaken for stress or worry. Jamie admitted she didn't fully grasp the weight of it in that moment. Now that sentence hangs heavy, one more warning that didn't sound loud enough until it was too late. Then she told him to adjust security, to change the locks, to handle it like a property issue rather than a personal emergency. That memory now haunts her. Jamie repeated the sentence out loud for the cameras, her voice shaking, replaying it again and again, as if saying it differently might change the outcome. That single moment reframed everything. It showed awareness, it showed fear, it showed escalation. This wasn't sudden or unpredictable, the danger was already in motion. And once again, information connected to Tom Cruise added another layer to the timeline. Sources indicate Rob had been advised to step away temporarily, to leave town, to go somewhere secure. Suggestions reportedly included remote properties, places designed to create distance and allow things to cool down. Rob refused, not out of arrogance but emotion. The holidays were coming. He wanted to be home. He wanted normalcy. He wanted family. Even when that family was fractured, the decision wasn't reckless. It was hopeful. It was human. But in hindsight, it feels like the final missed opportunity to change the outcome. Jamie didn't frame this as fate or bad luck. She framed it as a series of warnings that went unanswered. Moments where love outweighed fear, again and again. And once more the message landed with force. Silence doesn't keep people safe. In the end, Rob wanted one simple thing: his family together. That belief, that emotional attachment to unity and reconciliation, is what kept him standing in the line of danger. And that truth, raw, unresolved, and deeply human, now sits at the center of this story, refusing to fade quietly into the background. The cruel irony here is impossible to ignore. A man who spent his life creating warmth, laughter, and idealized family moments on screen ultimately found himself struggling to hold one together in real life. What's unfolding now isn't just a scandal, it's a dismantling. The polished image of the Reiner family is being taken apart piece by piece and rebuilt into something far darker, far more complicated, and far from a fairy tale. At the center of it all stands Jamie Lee Curtis, not only as a voice telling the story, but as someone living inside it. She isn't narrating from a safe distance or reflecting years later. She's reacting in real time. And when we watch her speak, we're not just witnessing a celebrity grieve, we're watching something uncomfortably familiar. Our own fears reflected back at us. The fear that love doesn't always save people. The fear that doing everything right still isn't enough. The fear that the people we raise can one day feel like strangers living just down the hall. Jamie's reaction tapped into something deeper, the unsettling idea that kindness can be mistaken for weakness in a world that doesn't play fair. That realization hit hard because it challenges the stories we tell ourselves about goodness and protection. When the trial eventually happens, fame won't matter. It won't be remembered for star power or celebrity names. It will be remembered because of betrayal, because the damage didn't come from outside forces, but from within the walls meant to offer safety. Jamie made that clear without ever saying it outright. She drew a line that shocked the industry, and once drawn, it cannot be unseen. She made it clear that Hollywood isn't closing ranks this time. There would be no quiet gestures, no behind-the-scenes fundraising, no carefully worded letters of sympathy meant to blur accountability. The community, she signaled, was standing with Rob Reiner, and not with the person alleged to be responsible for what happened. Her presence alone carried that message. A line had been drawn, and it said plainly, "This no longer represents who we are." In her framing, he no longer belonged to the story being told. And as events continue to unfold, she urged people to watch closely. Watch who stands beside her. Watch who steps forward now that the silence has finally shattered. Because once one person speaks this loudly, others begin to feel safe enough to follow. Names are already being whispered, figures who have stayed quiet until now. And when those voices emerge, the floodgates won't open gently. The truth, she reminded everyone, rarely arrives clean or comfortable. It comes out messy, painful, and impossible to take back once spoken. As she wiped her face and turned away from the cameras, Jamie said something that lingered long after she left. She said, "The truth is the last thing they have left to give him, the only form of respect that still matters." That idea stays with you, because it forces a confrontation with something deeply unsettling. Behind the tall hedges and gated driveways of places like Brentwood, there are realities no amount of fame can soften. Rob Reiner spent his life making people feel good. He made audiences laugh. He made people believe in connection, forgiveness, and happy endings. And yet, according to those who loved him, he didn't receive one himself. That contrast between what he gave the world and how his life ended is what gives this story its weight. Not spectacle, not celebrity, but the uncomfortable reminder that even the brightest legacies can end in unresolved silence once the cameras are gone. What he was left with feels almost too harsh to process. Something so cruel, it sounds like a rejected script. Yet this wasn't fiction. It was real. And Jamie Lee Curtis made sure none of us could look away from it. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe honoring someone like Rob means facing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it reshapes everything we thought we understood. Because pretending it didn't happen helps no one. The reality is settling in now. Rob is gone and the world feels colder, sharper, less safe than it did before. The story didn't end with closure or comfort. It ended with questions, warnings, and a silence that refuses to be ignored. And that may be the most honest ending of all. Jamie didn't offer easy answers. She offered awareness, a reminder that love doesn't always protect, that silence can be dangerous, and that truth, no matter how painful, still matters. Witnessing it may hurt, but turning away would hurt more. If this story moved you, made you think, or challenged how you see these public lives, make sure you support the channel. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more deep dives into celebrity stories that rarely get told honestly, and comment below with your thoughts. Your voice matters here. And don't stop now. Check out the next video on your screen for even more celebrity drama unfolding in real time. We'll see you in the next one.